Welcome to this episode of Wanderlust Solo Women Travel Unscripted. Real women, real stories, real journeys, and no filter. Join Gina, your host, to share the experiences and stories of solo female travelers and advocates from all over the world, with a mission to empower women of all ages, backgrounds, and life stages to embrace solo female travel with confidence and enthusiasm, while being authentic and real, unscripted. Confronting the challenges and apprehensions many women face when considering solo adventures, providing inspiration to break through those barriers. Sharing how life transitions, loss, and trauma can lead to amazing experiences, rediscovery, and life journeys. The good, the bad, and the ugly of authentic and honest travel. So let's throw out the script, get comfy, and jump right into this episode.
Hi everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the podcast where we ditch the filters and spill the travel tea and celebrate the wild and wonderful world of solo female travel. Today's episode is a little different. There's no guest in the chair across from me today. No expert, no travel story from someone else's life. Today it's just me. And I realised recently that I've shared so many incredible women's stories on this podcast, but I haven't really sat down and shared my own story properly. Not the polished version, not the business owner version, the real one. The woman who was a little bit anxious, a little bit restless, a little bit lost. The woman who didn't quite fit in and sometimes still doesn't. And the woman who booked a one-way ticket and never looked back. Solo travel didn't just change the stamps in my passport, it changed the way I see myself. It challenged me, it cracked me open, it taught me things I didn't even know I needed to learn. So today I'm interviewing myself. We're going back to the beginning, the fears, the turning points, the moments that quietly reshaped everything for me, and how that journey eventually became Wanderlust Solo Tours and, of course, this podcast. If you've ever felt the pull to travel, but also that wobble, this one's for you. Come on, let's dive in with me. So this is going to be an interesting one. So I'm going to ask myself questions and I'm also going to be the one responding. So let's dive into the first question. So here we go. Let's go back to the beginning. What was actually happening in your life when solo travel first called you? Whoa, this is a big one. There was a lot going on. I'd just come out, well, when I say just, I'd gone through a really bad relationship breakup, as some of you might know from previous backstory of mine. I had a home I was building, I had a business, and everything changed quite suddenly, and I was thrown into a lot of turmoil. It was during that time, I'd done a little bit of solo travel, but I actually don't talk about my Egypt trip very much because before my final separation, I went into my local travel agent and I just wanted to get away for a week just to clear my head. I'm here in New Zealand, so I was looking somewhere close by, and there on the shelf was a brochure to Egypt, and Egypt had always been a lifelong place I wanted to visit since I was a child. I asked the travel agent to give me details. They said there was one spot left on this particular date. I actually booked it there and then. It was very impulsive. And then went back and told my partner that I was heading off to Egypt for a couple of weeks. And so off I went. And it was during that time I was like, okay, I either need to commit to this relationship 100% or we need to, finally walk away and cut the ties. And I decided to commit to the relationship, returned from Egypt, and I got the news that he had decided the opposite. So, it had already come after a time when we'd also separated. So this was, our second time around. It was a pretty rough time, but that first trip to Egypt was a real eye-opener for me. I met so many amazing people. I come from a little tiny town of 5,000 to 10,000 people, was thrown into Cairo. I don't know, there's 22 million or something. So it was pretty crazy. And that really opened my eyes to what was out there. And over the next few years, I took the steps to make my solo travels reality. So that's sort of where that all began. Question number 2. What were you most afraid of before this solo trip? What surprised you once you actually did it? Well, the first is I bloody did it. That was the first thing. There was so much organising I had to do. I ended up having to sell my home. I downsized. I had to get a lot of things in place. Like I travelled on a UK passport. I was lucky to get an ancestral passport, so I had to go through the paperwork to do that. I applied for a job in the UK so I could fund for some of my travels. I had to set up someone to look after, I had animals. I had a lot to organise before I even went. So even just getting that all done was pretty nerve-wracking. So I suppose it took the attention away from the actual, hey, I'm just going on a one-way ticket to Paris and what do I do next? And I can't remember if I was actually nervous. I think I had blinkers on that I just needed to achieve this goal. And that's all I just focused. I needed to achieve that goal, and I didn't try to let any worries or fears or apprehensions get in my way. No doubt there was, I was leaving my home, I was leaving my pets, which I adored, my family and my friends, and I didn't have a ticket home. So it's not like, hey, I'll be back on this date or something. That wasn't how it was. So yeah, looking back, I just think I had blinkers on. I was determined to get that goal done. And the thing is, what it did taught me is I did get it done. I was more capable than what I thought. And I think that's something everybody needs to realize is just how capable they are. So yeah. And onwards and upwards from there. So what's the next question, I wonder? How did traveling alone change the way you see yourself? I suppose I'd always been in a relationship, so stepping out of that role and also way out of my comfort zone, it just showed how reliant I can be on myself and that, I was worthy of things. And that's a reminder I still have to tell myself today. It showed me that, I was thrown into some situations which, I've never dealt with before. One of the brief jobs I had was as a live-in carer for a lady with MS. I'd never even changed a baby's nappy, and here I was doing nursing duties. I'd done training while I was in the UK, but it was so out of my comfort zone, and I found that time actually really isolating because I was working 7 days a week. I had a 3-hour break each day, and that was solid for 3 months at that stage. That was probably the most isolating time. I was in a small area. I was just in Kent. It was a very, populated area, but, there weren't people I knew. So it was very isolating. I'm just very grateful that we had, things where I could ring people, or jump on FaceTime or something like that just to, alleviate those homesicknesses. And even something simple like watching Friends on TV, it was a real comfort to me. It made me feel like I wasn't so far away from home. I know that sounds really funny, but yeah, that's one of the things I remember is watching Friends and feeling not so isolated. But it taught me that I am capable, like I mentioned, and that, I was worthy of people's love and attention and friendship and new experiences. And yeah, so I'm grateful that I took that step. It was really, really scary, but it definitely made me feel better about myself, especially after my relationship breakdown. So it did massively change the way I see myself. Number 4. This is an interesting one. What did solo travel teach you about being alone versus being lonely? I think this is a really interesting question just for day-to-day life. What is the difference between being alone and being lonely? Like I said, when I was working as a healthcare worker, I felt very isolated and I felt very lonely and alone. But I think being alone is just not having people around you, where being lonely is a more an inward emptiness. And I definitely didn't feel alone in a sense when I was solo traveling. I had a lot of people, even though I was by myself when I stayed in hostels. I made so many friends. It was really interesting though, to compare, even now when I go solo traveling, it is a little bit different. I know I feel a little bit lonely when I'm in hotels because there's no one I can interact with. Whereas when I've stayed in hostels and things, there's always been people around. And it's just sharing sometimes that experience with someone, even if they're strangers, so, look at that. So you can bounce off each other. So there is a real difference between being alone and lonely. And I think for me, my loneliest period was when I was working and I didn't know anyone while I was traveling. Have I ever felt alone while solo traveling? not in general. I've always, solo but not alone. It's been an amazing experience in general, and I've met some fantastic people while I've been traveling, which are still my friends that I would never have got to have met otherwise. So I actually really like that question. Number 5. At what point did your personal solo travel journey turn into Wanderlust Solo Women Tours? I think so. The big change, I went to America one year. I met a friend while I was traveling in Turkey. We stayed friends. We're still friends now. I just met up with her last year in Toronto again after a few years hiatus. But I met her in Turkey. She came to stay with me, and then I went to visit her in the US during the biggest snowstorm, of course, of the last 100 years or something. But that's where I actually started doing a blog, because I had a lot of friends ask me for a lot of travel advice. So I started a little website and a little blog, and I am not a writer. Even now, it's something I struggle with, but I have got a lot better, and that's the same with my speaking. So doing the blog was actually a really great exercise. And then from that, just before the pandemic, I had really great timing. I was like, actually, I'd love to create trips for women, because when I based it on what I was searching for. I didn't want like a retreat where I had to do yoga all day, and I didn't want sometimes a tour when I was up at 6 o'clock and we were rushing everywhere every day. So I based my creation about what I felt I needed as a solo female traveler. And that's where I created my first trips. And it was also about inclusion, because I often felt like an outsider, never quite felt like, and even now to this day, like I fit in. So I really wanted to build a community, I think is the most important thing, where women felt like they belonged and were part of a community and didn't feel awkward and weird and different. And if they were, that was okay, where it was a really welcoming environment. And I think out of all the things I do with my travel experiences, that is the one main goal, is that everyone that comes feels welcomed, included, that they can just relax to be themselves, bring out that inner child, have a little giggle and a snort and, snort giggles and, be playful again. And I think we as women wear so many hats, we forget that. So that's where Wanderlust Solo Women Tours and even this podcast, was born from. It was from my desire to share amazing women's stories and connect everybody into a community where we believe in the similar things and want the same things and want to share those experiences. So that's where all this was born. Number 6, this is a goodie too. And it's quite often something I talk about. If a woman is listening right now and she feels the pull to travel, but she is still hesitating, what would you gently say to her? or gently, I'm not very tactful at the best of times, so I don't know if I'll be gentle. This could be anyone. I'm 55 this year, so I find myself really talking to midlife women currently, women that are transitioning in life in so many ways. This could be from changing careers, being separated, divorced, widowed, children leaving, denesting, just finding that they want a total redirection in life. They're in the middle of, looking after elderly parents. There are so many things going on in our lives at this time. I've talked to women that when they were young, they went and did amazing adventures, and now they don't think they could do that anymore. And yet they've run businesses and households and raised children. And it's like, you can use all those skills again. You did it once. And it's like we sometimes lose confidence. They say that is a lot to do with menopause, but whether it is or not, I think what it definitely taught me traveling solo is resilience, capability, and self-reliance and self-belief that you can do things by yourself and what you are capable and what you can experience. And it's freeing. We are so privileged to be able to travel solo, just to be able to travel. Not every person in the world even has a passport. There's many nations where people will never, ever experience the joy that we have of the freedom to travel. It is truly a blessing, and it can be honestly transformative. The amount of women I've seen, even if they didn't realize it at the time, it's an opportunity to gain perspective, clarity, because you're removed out of your normal day-to-day life and put in a different situation. So you're out of your comfort zone, but removing yourself from a situation gives you an opportunity to look back on it and breathe and reflect. And even if you use travel just to do that, gain perspective of what's important in your life, and I know it's really hard. We talk about, following your dreams, and I know I do that a lot, and, just go and travel and do this and change your life. If you're not happy with your job, change it, quit it. But at the end of the day, the reality is, a lot of people can't do that. They have obligations and financial obligations. They can't just quit their jobs and go traveling for 6 months around the world. But I did it in a way that worked for me. And I think that's the most important thing, that you do what you can facilitate to make something like that happen. Might not be the same experience as somebody else, but you do what works for you. And it can be something small, but it's a goal. Like for me, I did have to sell my house and downsize, but that gave me a little bit of money to say, okay, I've got, 6 months to a year to be able to do this. But I still had to work, facilitate it. And I did things like woofing and work away to make things happen. Those are other, there are so many different opportunities out there, like Her House is a great organization where women can host other women around the world, for free. Workaway, which like I said, and woofing and HelpX are great exchange things where you work in exchange for board and accommodation as well. So there are ways to stretch your budget, or if you want to travel closer, just if you can get a camper van or transform your vehicle so you can do overnighters somewhere, do what works for you. And my main message is, if you feel you're trapped or you're stuck, do something and step outside your comfort zone. And it is bloody scary and it is nerve-wracking. What's the worst that could happen? That's the thing. Compare it. What's the worst thing that can happen? Make that leap. Take that effort, make little baby steps, make it your goal. It might take a year, it might even take 2, 3, 4 years, but make it a goal. And I think that's really important message that, you just got to take that first step. I did it. I've watched so many other people do it, and you've just got to facilitate it and what works for you. So that was a little brief interview about some of the reasons how and why I do what I do. And my backstory. I have actually some really fun. I was actually going to share it, but I think I'll do it for another episode of my, I did a little bit of overseas dating there for a while, which I had about 3 dates overseas that I met people. So I'll leave that for another episode, but I've got some exciting guests coming up for the 2026 season. So I'm just lining them all up now. So please stay tuned. And subscribe, comment and like, because the more support I get, the more seen I am and the more amazing women I can bring on to share their awesome stories. And don't forget, if you'd like to be part of the show, pop a comment down below and I will get hold of you and send you a message on how you can come on and be a guest. But thank you again for tuning in to Wanderlust, Solo Women Travel Unscripted. And remember, it's never too late to unleash your wanderlust. Till next time.
Thanks for listening. Please share the love by liking, commenting, or subscribing, or join us in our Facebook community.